today I'm talking to Kevin Mulrennan, who's the author of Thank Your Lucky Stars, the 60s pop show featuring the Kinks, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. It's a long title, and it's a big book. I've weighed it. It's 2.3 kilograms. That's kind of the weight of a sort of medium-sized baby, I think. And it's 788 pages. It's bigger than a phone book.
It's about 1 or 2 pages short of the maximum that Amazon will allow, I think.
So this is print on demand. So Kevin doesn't have a garage full of 1,000 of these things. In fact, I don't think he could get 1,000 in a normal garage. I think he'd probably only get 4 or 5. It's an encyclopedia of pop show from the 60s, from 1961 to 1966. All the big names appeared on it, as the title suggests, and lots of forgotten people, lots of forgotten genres, lots of forgotten TV things. So obviously the most famous show, I would say, in this genre is probably Ready, Steady, Go, and maybe we'll come on and compare the two shows in a while. But Kevin, could you say why did you think a book needed to be written about Thank Your Lucky Stars?
Well, I've always been interested in the 60s, and I just felt it was an area that hadn't been exploited yet. You know, you've got books on Top of the Pops, you've got great books on Ready, Steady, Go, but it's kind of forgotten a little bit, and it's a shame because it was such a major show, networked virtually for most of the time, and it was on Saturday tea times, so, you know, really good viewing figures, but it tends to get forgotten. So that was one of the main reasons to sort of bring it back into the limelight a little bit more.
Why is that? Why is Ready, Steady, Go the one that's come down as being the thing?
I think it's probably to do with the amount of tape footage that survived. There's a bit more of the Ready, Steady, Go, even though a lot of that, unfortunately, has been wiped. You also had the Channel 4 repeats in 84-ish. You know, Dave Clark did those, so that kind of brought things out into the light a lot more. And I suppose Top of the Pops just went on for so long. You had the 60s, the 70s, 80s, so there was obviously a lot more footage that survived. So that's one of the main reasons, I think.
So Ready, Steady, Go would be shown nationally on, is that Friday night?
Friday night, the weekend starts here. Some regions did have have it later. They'd have it later on in the evening, or even on a different day. I believe at one stage in Scotland, they had it on a Sunday, if you believe. So, you know, it did vary. Most of the country would have got it, I suppose, Friday night. And
then Thank You Lucky Stars the next day. And would they have had they'd have had comparable viewing figures then?
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, they were talking different time spans. Ready, Steady, Go was 63 through to 66. Lucky Stars was earlier. They both did really well. Top of the Pops tended to overshadow them in later years. They got all the big acts that were into London. So, but at its peak, those two shows really did pull in a lot of viewers.
Now, why are you the man to write this book? Now, I know you did an earlier edition that now seems a slightly skimpy version, because this book, I can't, in the medium of audio, it's an encyclopedia, it's a show-by-show account. So you don't really do a kind of overview or themes. It's every show, you list everyone who was on the show, you introduce them, little newspaper cuttings. It's an encyclopedia, and you can just dip into it at any moment. Why were you the man for this, and why was that your approach?
There's two bits to that question. Really, I started it decades ago, really, 2004, and that's the slim version that you mentioned. This was pre-internet, really. There wasn't any internet about much. You had to literally go into libraries and do the research. So there was an advert in one of the daily newspapers to do a vanity project, really. You know, you could print so many copies of a book. I thought, aha, that's for me. So I subscribed to that, and I went into Birmingham Central Library on many occasions, got the old TV Times out. You had to physically get these massive volumes out, wrote down what I could. To be quite honest, then a lot of the names I didn't know myself. You'd know the big names, the Beatles, etc. But a lot of them, I had no clue who they were. I left it at that. I just got it published. It did okay. I sold a few copies, mainly through eBay. And then it sort of sat on my shelf for about 2 decades. Then Amazon KDP came along, and that really sparked my interest, this print on demand. So what I did, I rewrote it. It took me over a year. The internet was around then, so you could do a lot more research. There was a bit more footage kicking about. So it allowed me, and the fact that I'm from Birmingham as well, and it's filmed literally, you know, a couple of miles down the road from me, was a big incentive as well.
But why are you the man for it? Because you're too young to remember any of these shows, any of the 60s shows. Like I mean, I know how old you are. I won't tell the listeners. But it's not a nostalgia thing for you, but this is something that happened pretty much before you were born. So why the Why are you so intrigued by it?
I just always loved 60s music, always have. I love 70s music as well. So when I was growing up in the late 70s in Birmingham, I had this kind of mixture of 60s nostalgia and the new music that was coming from the 70s. So, I mean, my choice of music is pretty eclectic. I like quite a lot of different types of music, so that always helps.
It's a massive, I should say congratulations, because, I mean, I know, obviously I do a lot of things with authors, and I've been involved with books myself, and I know on any size of book, it seems it's always a very difficult birth, and there's a lot of editing, and there's a lot of, patience required, and points where everyone thinks they should just give up. But the size of this book, I cannot accentuate it, that you've had to really persist and really, plough on until the end.
It had to be done. If you're going to do it well, and just put everything into it, throw the kitchen sink at it. I mean, I do put little bits of commentaries and things in. I'm not as clever as that wonderful person he had on talking about the Velvet Mafia, who's
Daryl Bullock.
Yeah, I was so great listening to him.
I'll sort you out with a copy, Kevin Mulrennan. I'll sort you out with a copy.
That's it. It's definitely. I mean, that guy has obviously moulded a sort of commentary, as it were. I'm not clever enough to do that. I kind of like take a more encyclopedic view of things, based on what I'm interested in and sort of the training I've had, and I just put everything together.
Well, there is a slight crossover with that book which we did last year, The Velvet Mafia, about the gay impresarios of the 60s, written by Daryl Bullock. And there's a few kind of forgotten 60s acts in there that have this kind of almost tragi-comic vibe about them. Some of them, like Daryl Quist, some of them appear in your book. But we're going to try not to overlap too much with that. But so how many episodes survive? Could we go and see some episodes of this show on YouTube?
Well, yes, there's certainly stuff on YouTube, definitely there. There's 3 episodes that survive in total, and you've got fragments that have come from Australia and different other places along there. So there's also a few audios kicking about, a few scripts, you've got newspaper reports. So it's a case of those are the primary resources. You never know, hopefully something new might turn up, and you might get more information, as it were. But there's certainly a lot to be researched there. And then when you go through the individual artists, I found it really interesting doing the research on people I'd barely heard of. Everyone thinks the 60s, everybody was really famous. What kind of interested me doing this was the ones that didn't quite make it, the ones that maybe got 2 or 3 singles, and then in the 60s, they were very, very brutal. If you hadn't got your 3rd single and it wasn't a hit, you were out the door, and that was it. Your career in music was finished. I mean, can you imagine like a world without Ray Davies and the Kinks? You Really Got Me, their 3rd single was obviously a smash. If that hadn't got into the charts, I think the pie would have dropped them.
Their 3rd single. So what were their two? What were their 2 failures before that?
I had Long Tall Sally. That was their first appearance on Ready Steady Go, I think in January 1964, and You Still Want Me, Ray Davies competition. And they didn't do anything in the charts. And then in August 64, September 64, you had You Really Got Me. The first mention of the Kinks on national TV was actually on Spinadis on Thank You Lucky Stars. Brian Matthew mentioned it. He talked about the oddity of the name. You're talking about 60s kinky boots and all that. Quite a few connections there.
Well, I didn't realise, this is a side alley, but Petula Clark apparently had 30 records before she had a hit. But her dad had started a record label.
She's been going since the Second World War. She was a child actress.
Yeah, but she had 30 records up to the mid-50s, so she's still only a teenager before her first hit. So a backstory I never knew. So it starts in 1961, and I think it's quite interesting that, Ready Steady Go probably comes along, with just after the Beatles. But when Thank Your Lucky Stars begins, they have like jazz on there. There's novelty records. Yes. It's kind of still in a kind of variety mindset from the late 50s, and it's kind of hasn't. We haven't yet got the kind of hip 60s thing going on. And so, I mean, mate, we both, Kevin and I both picked out a few names that we can talk about. I want to talk about Kenny Ball and his Jazzmen, who seem to be on it quite a lot. And they kind of, that the jazz persists even once, because I think when we look back at the history of the 60s, we think, oh, then the Beatles came and everyone was cool, and then there was Carnaby Street. But Thank You Lucky Stars kind of shows that the eras overlap, and the jazz and novelty records carry on after the Beatles and the Stones. It's all in there together.
The trad jazz boom was about 61, 62. And yes, I mean, really the Beatles did help to kill that off. I mean, there was a lot of, as you say, old 50s acts struggling along, getting these TV appearances, getting TV money and so on. The Beatles really blew it apart when they appeared nationwide in January 63 doing Please Please Me. It really did change things. In the book, I've got a script from October 62, and it shows the old style Lucky Stars. You've got the trad jazz, you've got a bloke called Clinton Ford, who kind of did the comedy elements that you mentioned there as well. And, that was really the last remnants of that. And once the Beatles came along, it was all the groups really that really did take over. Kenny Ball, appeared many times, and him and Ackerbilt, they used to do like the audience warm up, so they would do impromptu concerts that would get the crowd going as well. And it's interesting with the trad jazz people; they often had one big hit, and then they sort of had minor hits along the way, and they always kept playing that one big hit. They'd appear on TV for decades afterwards, and they'd still be playing that one big hit that really captured the public's imagination.
Well, that's true, isn't it? Which is Stranger on the Shore for Ackerbilk.
Yes, indeed.
First British #1 in America, as you all know. What? I won't ask you Kenny Ball's big song, but you'll know, won't you? What's his big song?
Midnight in Moscow, wasn't it?
Of course it is, Midnight in Moscow. I won't ask you to sing it, but you probably would.
That's it. I know the tune. That's it.
So we mentioned the Beatles' first appearance in January 63. Was that on Thank You Lucky Stars?
No, that was their first appearance on the actual show. But it was really important because a fella called Dick James organised it. Philip Jones was the producer. Dick James, he was a real big media mogul, music mogul. He worked in the 70s with Elton John and so on. And he was the one that got them that contract, really brought them to the attention of Philip Jones. And they actually, Dick James, they got the publishing rights to the Beatles really through that Thank You Lucky Stars connection. And they appeared more times on Thank You Lucky Stars, the Beatles, than, Top of the Pops and Ready, Steady, Go combined. And that's kind of forgotten a little bit because I think it's the availability of footage.
So that was their first national appearance?
Well, no, there was other appearances as well. There was a show as well, I believe, Discs A Go-Go, they appeared on that. But you put it there as one of the first major ones, certainly, the major ITV network that appeared on various little shows, Lenny and Pops, I believe, on the BBC and so on. But it was really a breakthrough moment for them. And from then on, they were regulars. And, of course, being pop royalty, they got their own specials. They could do 2 songs, then eventually 3, and, culminating in 4. They'd build a whole show around them, the Merseyside specials.
Now, you wanted to talk about a specific Beatles appearance, didn't you? Where they play a song they don't play any other time.
Yes, there's one other appearance, I think. Yes, It Is the song, and it was in April 65. And it's really interesting because it's kind of like the death of the regional pop show, or the ITV pop show, because after that, it was all the pop promos used to come in, or they wouldn't appear in the studio. And it's a bit of a shame, really, because the excitement, the Beatlemania, travelling to Aston Studios, getting surrounded, all that national coverage, that kind of died the death because of that busy touring around the world and so on. So on that particular occasion, 3rd of April 65, they did 3 numbers. They did 8 days a week, Yes It Is, and Ticket to Ride. So as far as I'm aware, they only did Yes It Is on one of the shows. I think it was Top of the Pops. It could have been Ready to Go. I think it was Top of the Pops. So it's so frustrating that footage isn't around because to perform a song just twice and it's not there, and it's really frustrating, as it were. And the Beatles as well. Another interesting aspect, on the 25th of December 65, there was a thing called the Cracker Suite, the Beatles Cracker Suite, and Keith Beckett, who was the director of the show, he did a kind of ballet. There was this song out, this kind of Cracker Suite, based on the Nutcracker Suite that was performed. And again, unfortunately, that footage isn't around. It was a ballet resembling the Nutcracker Suite. Will be danced to the Beatle Cracker, a new number by the Liverpool Four. So again, it's frustrating that this footage isn't around, that they got this classically adapted Beatles song. A photograph of it exists, a still of these dancers dancing to it, but it's kind of like forgotten about in Beatles mythology. It's not really mentioned all that.
Does the audio exist of those? Were they recorded and released anywhere?
There's no audio as far as I'm aware. I've seen a few stills on eBay of the appearance from April 65. Around that time, they always got these carnations from a fan, and they always used to wear them. It's on paperback writer and so on top of the pops. And there's a few stills. Somebody just literally pointed a camera at the telly and took a few of them. And that's all that exists of that footage, unfortunately, as far as we know.
That's amazing. Well, so I'm going to go back on to my next one. Well, I'm going to pick out, Paul Nicholas. Now, Paul Nicholas is a very star with great longevity, still going. I think he's still touring. And, of course, very famous. He had hits in the 70s, Dancing with the Captain. I think he's been on EastEnders, of course, Just Good Friends. But what's quite interesting to, anyone too young to watch these shows is the kind of past life of a lot of people who are later famous. They've all had a go at being a pop star, seemingly, in the 60s. And so maybe Paul Nicholas stands for them. Kevin, maybe we could say a bit about Paul Nicholas's dealings. He
appeared twice on the show. He appeared on the 29th of May, 65. He was actually, his name was Paul Dean, and he performed the song You Don't Own Me. He was in Hair as well, the musical.
Yeah.
But that was another famous thing. I think his full name, I've written it down here, is Paul Oscar Buselink, Beuselinck. So I remember him from Just Good Friends, that great sitcom, John Sullivan, written by Dave Logan. And that's interesting because you've mentioned that Showbiz thing, because Lucky Stars did feature a lot of Showbiz comedy records, which makes it different from Top of the Pops and Ready Steady Go. He also appeared as Oscar, because his middle name was Oscar, in the penultimate show. He was in the 18th of June, 66. And he did a single called Club of Lights, but didn't chart or anything, got a bit of airplay. He was in the NME as a big advert as well. He'd be a good podcast for you on a later date.
I know. It's telling me my job here, Kevin Mulrennan. You're quite right, though, because he's done everything. We'd have to skate through it. Wouldn't we? But I think it all kind of shows that it's an all-ages show, isn't it? It's, once you get into the pop shows, you get the idea that they're for teenagers. Right now we have separate teenagers. But even in 1961, 62, later, they're kind of thinking, well, we're going to have some pop on here, but then we're going to have some stuff for little kids and some stuff for the mums and dads. And it's family entertainment, basically, which happens to have pop music in.
I mean, I love it. I mean, I love all the showbiz, the comedy, all that kind of stuff. And Ready Steady Go's often portrayed as a hipper show. They didn't have any of this. But for me, the attraction of Thank You Lucky Stars is the fact that they had comedians doing these funny records. And these records sold very, very well in the 60s, 70s. And you had things like Junior Choice. They're always getting, generational thing. If you can write a hit that, sells a few records every year, it's amazing. You have people like Terry Scott as well.
He's on my list. Because he comes on and he plays a song called... I haven't got it written down, but it's something like "Don't Light the Fire Till Santa's Come Down the Chimney."
Oh, yes. I mean, that Christmas special. I mean, you're quite right. It was a family show. All the family could watch. You had the teenagers interested in maybe the trad jazz or whatever was going on, the latest Beatles hit. You had the 50s kind of variety show, so mum and dad could watch that as well. And the audiences were massive. I mean, Saturday tea time, fantastic. You really got, especially the Merseyside specials. They got, massive figures that they'd die for these days.
Maybe we could talk about a presenter, because you got, Pete Murray writes an introduction to the book. Now, how old, I keep putting Kevin on the spot. I was good. In his 90s, roughly speaking.
He appeared on Boom Radio, would you believe, at Boxing Day. I haven't caught up with it yet because of that Villa Park on Boxing Day. But, he appeared on Boom Radio and still doing his stuff. I've met him on a couple of occasions. He goes to events in Birmingham, Kaleidoscope Television, and he was great. He gave me the 4 words. He talked a little bit about the show and how he enjoyed it, meeting the Springfields and a happy atmosphere. So thanks, big thumbs up to Pete, because he was great. Really helped me with the book.
There's a terrible story about the presenter. Now, I can't remember if it's Pete Murray, but who refuses to work during a technician strike, and he shows solidarity. Is that Keith Fordyce, or does Keith Fordyce come in?
Well, what happened was, with the presenters, as far as I'm aware, Pete Murray was the original one. He did the first series. Then there was a co-compare. You had Keith Fordyce and you had Brian Matthew. there was a big dispute, a big equity dispute. We remember in the 70s, like there was ITV disputes, strikes all the time. And basically, Keith Fordyce, because he was an equity member, he refused to go onto the show. But Brian Matthew, because he felt that his equity membership had slipped, he joined the show. He did the show on his own, as it were. And eventually, he was the sole presenter, as it were. But Keith got invited back to do the specials. When there was the anniversary specials, Keith was invited back. Brian Matthew was invited back. Of course, he had Jim Dale later on, did the presenting as well for a good few years.
And so Brian Matthew was the strike breaker. I mean, he's come down as being this cuddly.
It's all in the book.
I know. There's plenty to read, Kevin. We're not giving anything away. We could talk for an hour, and they'd still have 784 pages to go at. Come on.
There is a lot of things to discover. I mean, and also thing as well. Brian, he had an operation. He was unwell for about 6 weeks, and something I never knew until I'd researched. They had a string of different presenters. They had a bloke called Martin Locke, who was a South African-based chap who did sport. He did World of Sport and things like that. So whether he was around in Birmingham and could fit in at the time, I don't know. You had Simon D. Do you remember Simon D?
Yeah, ended up driving a bus. But now you're passing into the legend, because Simon D is someone that I think when I was quite a small boy, my mum pointed him out in the street to me, I think, and said, that's Simon D, he used to be on the television a lot, and now he's a bus driver. So from a very early age, I've been across the poignancy and the brevity of showbiz fame. And so and he presented this as well.
He was when Brian was ill, he went in for one episode. A bloke called Don Moss as well. He did Pick of the Pops and things like that. He presented a lot of TV shows. He as well filled in when Brian was recovering from this operation that he had, that I discovered. But
the most famous, well, not presenter, but the most famous person, and I believe her catchphrase is still in the language, Janice Nicholls. Janice Nicholls, who's a teenager. I mean, maybe you could say something about her, and also you've got a contribution from her in the book as well, but maybe you could give us a rendition of her catchphrase,
Oh yeah, I'll give it 5 in the Black Country accent. That's right. I mean, it's gone down in legend. I mean, it probably was the most famous thing about the show. I mean, I remember in the 70s looking at a big billboard, and my mum pointed out, said, "Oh, that's Janice Nicholls." I said, "Who's that?" And it was a Cadbury's thing. They were doing a kind of revival, but she had these like Skippy bars, Cadbury Skippy bars. You can see the adverts. They're on YouTube. And she started off as a teenager in around about 61, 62 for this thing called Spinner Disc, which was basically a straight rip-off of Jukebox Jury. A bloke called Alan Freeman did it. Not Alan Fluff Freeman. This was a guy called Alan Freeman who was big at Pie Records.
Oh, right.
New Faces. Do you remember New Faces in the 70s?
Yeah.
He was a judge on that. So he devised this thing where he had a guest DJ. You had to say Brian Matthew introducing it. He had 3 teenagers. Janice would generally be one of them. You had people like Billy Butler up in Liverpool who came down. Loads of different people were the guest judges, and they, used to give marks out of 5 for the records. And I mean, Janice was on it for a good long while. That kind of morphed into something called the Pop Shop, which is discussed in the book. She needed an abacus because they were up to 5 ratings in the records back then. But I think that's part of the appeal. I mean, it was a great thing for press. You could get Janice in the press, the Daily Mirror, the Daily Express. It really did sell the show that an ordinary person from the Black Country could become a star, as it were.
Well, there's 2 things. I think we should clarify, which I didn't know until I read your book, that 5 is the maximum score. So, because it's always come down to me, the catchphrase, I'll give it 5. I've always thought, 5 out of 10. It's like I don't like it much, but fair play, I'll give it 5. No, I'll give it 5. That's the best you could get.
Yeah, that was the best you could get. She always used to say that she never gave every record 5. If she didn't like something, she would be honest about it and give it 3, or she'd say, I'll give it 4, but I wouldn't buy it. That kind of way.
I love these phrases. But so she's kind of a professional teenager, like like Cathy McGowan presented Ready Steady Go, and it's like she's just turned up.
You probably read in the book that she actually appeared on Ready Steady Go in a mime contest.
Who? Janice Nicholls?
She did, yeah. She appeared on Ready Steady Go. You know those mime you might have seen the one with the Rolling Stones where they do "I Got You, Babe," Sonny and Cher. You seen that one on the repeats?
No, this is like the thing that's very big now, isn't it? The lip syncing. Is it like that?
Yeah, it was like they were just doing funny things. I mean, Brian Jones had a great big massive, rubber hands. You know those kind of comedy rubber hands. They were dressed up. So she judged one of those, the mime contest. And the same week, Michael Aldred, who was a presenter on Ready Steady Go, and Kathy McGowan, they appeared on Spinner Disc to give their verdict of the records. Unfortunately, the only thing that exists are photos. That's the only thing, which is such a shame.
But Janice Nicholls, like, she didn't just turn up once. She's on, a series of different shows, being like a normal teenager. But in fact, she's quite famous all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, you see her occasionally. She pops up on nostalgia shows, and they film Janice. Yes, that's right. I mean, yeah, if you mention Thank You Lucky Stars, you're always going to think of Janice Nicholls, I think.
And you had dealings with her. Did you meet her or did you write to her?
A long time ago, when I did the first original version of the book, she very kindly sent me a few little snippets, a few little stories. I adapted a few of them from various Radio 2 documentaries as well. She talks about it in great length, and that she wasn't starstruck at all. It's just a job to her, and a fascinating character. And there's loads of pictures of her in the book as well. So anybody who likes Janice will enjoy the book.
There's another guy, Jackie Atom. Jackie Atom, who is famous to people. I would say famous. I mean, the show he's now famous for is still on. I mean, tell us a bit about his labyrinthine career. 1 minute on Jackie Atom.
Yeah, I mean, when I first did the book, I didn't know who this character was at all, and I did my research for the second version. We're talking Trevor Peacock. We're talking about that wonderful actor who did Vicar of Dibley, that wonderful sort of bumbling, no, yes. Absolutely. I'm not trying to do your job here, Dunc, but he'd be somebody he's got two sons. He sadly passed away recently. He's got two sons who are actors. There's another good podcast there for you. And he's brilliant. I mean, he was Jim Trott in Vicar of Dibley. He started off working a lot with Jack Good. You remember Jack Good, the ABC man who did all those wonderful shows? Trevor, he compared Drumbeat, which was a BBC show, which was a great show there. And he did scripts for Jack Good. He did scripts for Oh Boy, and he actually appeared with the Beatles as well. Around the Beatles, a Jack Good special done by Rediffusion, where the Beatles dressed up as Shakespeare characters. It's still out there. It still exists. It's out there on YouTube. Well worth a visit. This guy, Trevor Peacock, he was a classically trained actor. He could do Shakespeare. And he wrote songs. I'll rattle off a few of them for you here, Duncan. Mrs. Brown, you've got a lovely daughter.
Oh, he wrote that? Hermes Hermits?
Correct. These are all co-written, with other people at different stages. He voted for Jess Conrad, who's mentioned in the book, Adam Faith, Lance Percival. He wrote comedy records for him. Billy Fury, Joe Brown, and the Vernon's Girls. Do you remember the Vernon's Girls?
Well, I mean, I don't remember them. I've heard of them as a historical, Come on.
He also, would you believe it, he had a trial for Spurs as a footballer.
What a guy!
He's fantastic. I mean, there's so much to this guy, and he appeared with a guy called Big Jim Sullivan, who was a session man, very famous session man in the 60s. Big Jim Sullivan, I believe, Ichiku Park or the Small Faces.
Yeah.
You know that wonderful guitar intro. That was apparently done by Big Jim Sullivan, who appeared on the show. This appearance hot his esteem. Legend has it was actually Jack Good who did the vocal on this. Jack Good, who wanted to be a pop star, and he got, as far as we're aware, Jackie Atom was kind of like the front man, the crazy person who would do the miming and so on. So an incredible character, really, Trevor Peacock, and so sad when he passed away recently. He'd had a long battle with dementia. Really, really an unsung hero. We're talking about unsung heroes in the book. He did so much, and I'm sure I've only scratched the surface of what he did.
Is there anyone? I mean, there's people who go on to have kind of second or third lives, like Paul Nicholas or like Trevor Peacock.
Yes.
But and then there's people who seem to me to be totally forgotten, like the kind of lost glamour girls. Maybe we'll talk about Carol Keys in a bit. But is there anyone? Is there anyone who's kind of undeservedly forgotten, whose music is actually really good, And even the old crate diggers like ourselves have never heard of them.
There's so many. There's a guy recently who I've been corresponding with called Spencer K. Gibbons. He's got a wonderful book out. Some of us didn't make it. He was in a band called Me and Them, a band based in Barnsley in the 60s. And it just summarises the record. They had 2 or 3 singles, didn't quite make it. They had TV appearances on various shows. Just didn't get the break that they deserved. I mean, his autobiography, I'd really recommend it. It's a great romping read. You can read it quickly and get, a sense of the 60s and the rip-off by the managers and didn't quite make it. So Spencer K. Gibbons, for Me and Them, they did a Hank Lachlan song called I Think I'm Going to Kill Myself. And it got banned by the Beeb. Now, when you get banned by the Beeb, it's normally like a surefire way to number 1. Yeah. But it didn't happen for them. And this song, it was misinterpreted. It's not like I'm really seriously going to jump off a bridge or whatever. It was kind of like a put down and like, I'm going to kill myself, to a mate, sort of like to brush it over, as it were. And it got banned. It was in a publication called the Daily Herald, which was an old newspaper, which actually folded the same year that they slagged off Me and Them. And Louis Benjamin, who was the key man at Pi Records, actually got involved. He had to respond, heard the record and said, I'm going to ban it. I'm not going to, So maybe they kind of quashed that, and that could have been a hit, and it could have led on to other things. So Me and Them are definitely worth looking at, a band from Barnsley. And those guys went on to have careers in music, but not on the telly. Spencer, he worked for years in places like Butlins. He was a winner on New Faces, again in the 70s.
Right.
There's another character that I mentioned, Tammy St. John. She was a 14-year-old, and she was called Judith Costa. She's still around. I actually correspond with her on Facebook. Born in Holme Church in Essex. And she had a few singles out. They're well respected, released on Pi. She's very big on the Northern Soul circuit, all these obscure records that didn't quite make it, but still quality. And she appeared on the 13th of Feb 65. She sang the song He's the One for Me. And the little twist in this was the camera was set up so that she was on the passenger at a pillion of the bike, and you couldn't see who the bloke was at the end. And at the end, the camera twisted, and it was none other than Herman's Hermits, Peter Noon. So that was a nice little twist of that.
You love that. You love that fact.
She talks about the fact like she was surrounded in the studio in Aston. She was just, because Herman's Hermits were there, they were under siege. And I think you get a little sense in the book of the kind of excitement of the people that camped outside Aston Studios to see all these. There's a lady I work with called Sue, and she told me a wonderful little story about the Beatles. She used to camp out and try and see all these people along the Aston North Road. And she was sent off to get some bacon butties, because it was getting time and she was hungry. This Rolls Royce drives up. The screen goes down the window and a hand pops out and grabs the bacon butty. And it was only John Lennon. And then just, ate the thing and then drove off. I mean, he hadn't told that story to anybody apart from me, after 50 years. So I put that in the book. And that's what's got a good response, actually, is the kind of little fan memories that there's a whole section of. People who saw and, triggers little memories, as it were.
Wow. So, maybe we could mention, what about Carol Keyes? So going through the book, I mean, I do find it quite poignant. I think even the people like ourselves who think we may be across pop history and there's hundreds of people in the book who, like you say, get in the newspapers, get on the telly, maybe they release 2 or 3 records and then, they disappear from pop history. And so maybe Carol Keyes is one of them. Maybe say something about her.
I mean, she was also an actress. Luann Peters was her name. The most famous thing she saw is Fawlty Towers. She was in the hilarious episode, The Psychiatrist, where Basil Fawlty is obsessed by that beautiful blonde girl who's in the room.
She's the girl.
That's it. And there's another artist there, Nicky Henson, who's the kind of like the guy who's got all the medallions, the sort of like the kind of like what would you call him? The groovy guy sort of thing, who's attractive to all the ladies. he was on Lucky Stars as well, and he performed a song. You also got Bernard Cribbins. He was in Fawlty Towers as well, and he appeared on the show. But going back to Carol, she did a song, You Beat Me to the Punch. It was an American song. She did a cover version. It was covered quite a lot. There's a fella called Tony Jackson out of the Searchers. He did that with Tony Jackson and the Vibrations, and they appeared, and it's still around, the footage on Ready, Steady, Go. And again, released a few singles, just didn't do anything, but, you know, got work regularly. She was in horror movies, apparently. I'm not an expert on that, but she appeared in a few horror movies and gained a cult following. So all these people did eventually sort of make it in showbiz, but in a kind of like appearing in shows, you know, seaside shows or regular theatres. They earned a living, but they weren't millionaires, I suppose you'd say.
We believe that we're going to have a playlist relating to this podcast. People can go on Spotify and hear some of the names of yesteryear that have not really come. Well, they're on Spotify, but they've got very few listeners. And Kevin is kindly putting together a little list for us.
It's good because they deserve a bit more, you know, exposure. I mean, I love the sixth season, but you can only listen to sort of the major hits so many times if you think, I want something a bit new or something a bit more obscure. So it's good that you're kind of highlighting all these people, because since I've researched them up, it's led me on to things like Spotify and find, you know, oh, I didn't know that person did that song, and that leads you to another one.
So we'll have we'll have that playlist on Spotify and put, transport people even further. Now, but who is this other guy? Now, I had his name. Is it Johnny Lee? And he's gone into singing because he had to give up a promising career as an artist due to a leg injury. Now, what kind of artist was he that a leg injury would have prevented him from doing art? What was he one of those artists who paints with his feet?
I mean, that could be just like a PR stunt. I just found that in a newspaper. I did a lot of research from the newspapers, and apparently he was a talented artist, and he got stuff, you know, in you know, Royal Academies and different things like that. So again, one of these people that probably appeared once on the show, as far as I'm aware, and was forgotten about. I mean, it's what has been interesting is getting in contact with people who appeared a few times on the show. There was another guy called Ray Cousins who appeared once or twice on the show but didn't have any hits, but he was a really nice guy and he got in contact with me. Again, he made a career, as far as I'm aware, he's still singing out on cruise ships. So they're still doing the thing that they love. They're getting paid for it. Okay, they're not like living in a mansion in Nisha or whatever, and they're not multimillionaires, but they've got, you know, all those memories to look back on, and they can tell the family appeared on, you know, TV with the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. So I think it's an important thing that's kind of been a little bit neglected.
How old is this guy who's still on the cruises?
He's going to be 80 something.
It must be 70s, I suppose, if he was a youngster out then. Yeah. I mean, a lot of them do. I mean, I know Spencer does a load of stuff on. He does pantomimes. You know, they get work, and they work, you know, there's loads of work in panto and being dames and that. So reading through as well the stage in the 70s, a lot of these people got onto the shows and went into Butlins, you know, the red coats and all that. So but they were earning a living anyway. That's good to know.
That's good. I like that you kind of look out for them. You're like the old headmaster of the Lucky Stars school. You're going, they've gone on, they've got a steady job, they're on the cruises. You have a kind of a pastoral approach to them. I quite like that.
Well, it's good because, you know, it's a forgotten thing because, you know, everybody knows virtually everything there is to know about the Hollies or the Beatles or the Kings of the Stones, I think. But these guys had interesting lives, and yet they're not kind of out there, not kind of documented, and they make an interesting read.
Who was the person you got in touch with who, you know, you were most chuffed wrote back, or, you know, a moment of research that really knocked your socks off?
Oh, Tammy St. John was great. You know, she gave me that information via Facebook. That was, you know, so interesting. And the nice thing was about that story about Peter Noone was I was looking the other day through some Photoshop archives, Shutterstock, and I found the picture. There's a picture of her in rehearsals on a bike with Peter Noone, which I hadn't been aware of. Now, if I'd have seen that, I thought, who is that? What's going on? You know, I don't even think there was a caption. You know, the researcher didn't have a caption on it. No. So it's incredible to see that. Spencer K. Gibbons has been a good mate to get in contact with. You know, I've enjoyed reading his book. Lots of people, Ray Cousins, as I say. Oh, Sylvan was great. Sylvan Mason, who was married to Barry Mason. She was very good as well. Again, she wrote a tune for Morecambe and Wise. You got that Showbiz connection there as well. And she was great. We're still trying to find some footage of her with Ken Dodd and some photo stills. Because her one was another one of these ones that got banned. It was another one of these I'm going to kill myself sort of records. And Ken Dodd was doing Happiness. So you have that wonderful contrast. So they got the Daily Mail or Express, they got that angle. And there must be photos out there. I haven't found them yet. I'll be looking for them. I found ordinary rehearsal shots of Sylvan. But, you know, maybe somebody out there might have a copy of the Daily Mirror with that in it. She got Sylvan as well for a publicity stunt. She got locked on one of these pirate radio stations out in the middle of the North Sea for a day. It's all a great publicity stunt. You know, the boat was, you know, going off. It was, you know, hooting the horn, but she stayed so that the press next day could greet her when she came off. So a lovely little story as well.
Wow. Well, look, there's so much in it. And I think anyone who's got a vague interest in the 60s or pop music or show business or television, you know, I think you just open this at any page. In fact, that's the only way. I mean, you said this to me earlier before we recorded, Kevin. It's the way to do it is just to dip in. It's not a book that's made to be read from page one.
One of the big books I love is Doug Hinman's book on the Kinks. I think it's, you know, it's really thick and it's got all the concerts I went to. You couldn't read that from cover to cover. You have to dip in. You have to think, what were they doing in April '67 or whatever? It's that kind of book. You could, and it's that big, the book. You couldn't read it in one fell swoop. You'd have to sort of refer to it, and you know, you could go through it nice and steady. It might take you a year to read it or whatever, and you know, go through the. But if one thing I want to do with further editions, so when I add these stories, I want to improve the index a little bit. There is a basic index at the back, but that's something I want to work on so that somebody who was researching a pop star could get to it, you know, quicker. But it's all in there if people want to have a good delve.